And we're on the air with episode 9 of wire106.
Right. What's this episode called again?
This is Stray Rounds.
Stray Rounds. So why would we call it Stray Rounds? Any quick? This is kind of an easy one, no?
One shootout at the beginning,
Yeah.
and a stray bullet catches someone, and then there's the duck.
I was thinking about the doc also when Pooh threw the bag over and it's just sitting there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
That's right. That's another one. Yeah, it's interesting. I love the titles because they have not only one meaning, but usually they have three or four, which is, really, I mean, obviously the kid in the beginning of this episode is one immediate way. And I'm going to start sharing some images. We're going to get right into it. This is week 6, and we'll be talking about design. So one of the things I asked Lakeisha, Nikki, Paul, and myself to think about as we were getting into this discussion was some of the designs of particular scenes. And we can think about designs in a lot of different ways. And hopefully this conversation, not only today, but over the next one over the week, will help us get to that a little bit. So I'm going to share one of my first shots. And I don't know if it's designed, so you guys can call me as not sticking to my own rules right away. But I had a couple of quick things I wanted to think about. This is the very beginning of the scene. And this is when this guy is coming by to get drugs. And he's like, WMD, WMD. And he's like, I don't want WMD. I want what you had last week, which was Bin Laden. I was just struck, not only by, like, you can see the, the city here, you can see the sign, cars towed away, you can see the Ford, you can see the details, like he's got an easy pass. Like, there's so many details within the scene that you can see right here. But there's also this kind of notion of the war happening now, right? Like, we are now going into Iraq looking for weapons of mass destruction. Bin Laden is now a figure that's hated across the U.S., and we're really in post 9/11 America. And it's interesting how this happens on the street corner around titles for drugs. So I was just really struck in this episode right away how the actual episode is dealing with some deeper kind of cultural, political elements like 9/11 and war. So immediately that's something that struck me. The other thing that struck me at the end of the shootout scene, which we have here, is the balance of the street that the shootout happened. So this is after the shootout's done, and this is the last shot you get before it goes to the titles. And I was just struck by the design of the shot. You have this kind of potentially, the street in Baltimore, this kind of balance of the trees and of the row houses and of the actual asphalt, and this notion of, again, Baltimore as a character, right? And this street is one you've seen throughout the episodes. And you've seen what just happened here, but also at the same time, and they say this later in the episode, it's completely peaceful, right? This could be Brooklyn, right? This could be a street anywhere in some ways, but it doesn't look like a kid just lost his life because of a stray bullet and all the horror that comes with that. So I was kind of immediately struck by that balance and the design of that shot. The other thing that I was interested in right away in this episode is the computer. The computer and the technology plays a bigger role in this season, and you see it everywhere here. You see the little gateway. Remember those gateway computers, right? They had those. Was it called Gateway? I think it was. That's a gateway computer Lester is using. You have one in the background. You have all these cords. They're actually cloning the machine. It's interesting how much the design of this, and I'll talk about this a few times, is really start to move towards the digital and move towards computer. And we're also introduced to one of the great characters in The Wire, Bunny Colvin, right? Yeah. Bunny's amazing, and I love this shot of Bunny because it shows his stature. And he's one of the few guys in The Wire who's like totally sees that the police department is not doing its job, that the whole thing is basically a racket, and that we're really not taking responsibility by policing and intelligently. So I love Bunny. So let's go back to this, because this is one of the first shots that either Lakeisha or Nikki shared. So here's one of the first shots. What do you guys have to say about this one?
I think this was my shot, This kind of stood out to me. I didn't even realize when I took the screenshot that there was this finger pointing out. I was more so trying to capture the yellow, yellow is the dominant color in the scene. There's the tape for the crime scene. There's the little labels that they're putting on the ground, and everyone's in these yellow rain jackets. And it's kind of an odd contrast to me because it's such a dark scene. It's like, it's a murder scene, it's a shooting, but there's just like this kind of happy, bright yellow that everyone has. And then this man that I noticed that there was this man pointing in the shot, right in the middle of the shot. And it's just, for me, it kind of feels like it's showing like urgency, like they're trying to figure out who did this, and it contributes. There's just a lot going on.
And it's cool the way the shot is framed around the caution tape, right? The caution tape is kind of almost framing the shot and then in it. And in the foreground, you have those bullet holes in the Cadillac, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's a beautiful shot, actually. I really like it.
That shot reminds me of a Cleat Up for Hazardous Waste or something.
Yeah.
All that yellow.
Yeah, it's interesting, as if, West Baltimore were a kind of hazardous waste area, right? Like, you're cleaning it all off and you're sending in the troops. It almost looks like the woman behind the three in the yellow jackets has a broom.
It does.
Right? As if she were sweeping it up.
Right. Sweep it out, take it out the trash.
Exactly. Yeah, that's actually awesome. Okay, so let's look at the next shot. Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
I found this interesting. It was I think this is when right after the shooting, Poot is kind of explaining himself to Stringer with and it's one of the dominant objects in this picture or the screenshot that I had are the praying hands.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting. I felt like that was like symbolizing like Poot is kind of at Stringer's mercy, like he's basically like he's kind of in trouble. He's in
confession, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like a confession.
Like he's praying for his life.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
Stringer has some pity on him.
That's right. And look at even the lighting there. Like you said, like the lighting totally highlights the hands. It's not even like it's imagined, right? Like, and the Bible is over there on the left of him, right? So you see this big Gideon Bible with the gold plate with the gold pages. And the cool thing I thought about this is you don't see it here and we don't capture it here. Does anyone remember the sound laid underneath here?
I don't.
Oh, you've got the organ going?
You got the organ. Like very religious organ. That's like reinforcing this notion that, Bodhi is in confession. And his confessor is obviously Stringer. And I think someone actually included that. Yeah, so here's his confessor, right? It's awesome.
Yeah, this was the other side of it. And I thought this was an odd contrast because you have kind of like the Poot scene was very like holy and religious, but here it's like just Stringer dressed in plain clothes and a bunch of bottles. It's like the foreground is just a bunch of bottles, which I thought was interesting. It's an odd contrast.
And he's in the light, like he's omnipotent or something.
Absolutely. And he's got the filing cabinet behind him, which I think is interesting, right? Like, it also reinforces the business, right? Like, he controls the information, and, he's the one, right? And there it comes up again and again. You guys included some very interesting screenshots of Stringer later on in this episode, which I think does reinforce this notion of him feeling like he has to take on everything. And he is the direct link to God in some ways. He's also playing God, right? Because I think you mentioned it, like, Bodhi really is praying for his life. And that's not just a figure of speech. Like, I'm going to go to my kids are going to come to me and pray for their life that I don't do something. Like, that's a figure of speech. With Stringer, it's not a figure of speech. It's a reality.
Yeah.
Right?
And Bodhi knows it very well since...
That's right.
He took care of Wallace on Stringer's order.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, that's awesome. And that's a really great scene. And one of the things about design is, like you're saying, is you see the bottles in the front, right? The file cabinet in the back, and previously you saw the hands and the Bible surrounding him. Like, you have to think that these are part of the composition of the shop. That these are part of how they're designing it to kind of elucidate. Like, when you start reading it closely, it kind of helps, quote unquote, illuminate like what's happening in this scene and reinforce that effect. Because when you're just watching it, you're just focusing on what Bodhi's saying, what Stringer's saying, what's the narrative. But as you stop a little bit and just look at it, so much of that. And it's too bad we missed the sound here, because the sound here is perfect. It's like you're in a church. It's gorgeous. So here's the next one. I included this just as a quick one, just to look at the lines. This is when Bodhi's going to throw over the guns, and you'll notice the lines in the bridge there. You got the red kind of what do you call that thing when it comes down in the street to stop you?
Crossing pole, or for the railroad crossing.
Yeah, and then you have also the lines and the angles on the sidewalk, right? We're kind of keeping people from jumping off the bridge. And I just thought it was an interesting shot, almost caught up into thirds. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I like that. I just thought it was an interesting shot. And I understand if you guys didn't, and I'll move on. So here's another one.
Oh, okay. I included this one. I also thought this was just an interesting shot. There isn't anything that stands out really, but what caught my eye were the lights and just the colors in the scene. It's just very dark. It looks a little hazy at the bar always. And this is not just particularly for this scene. Like, in every one of their the bar scenes where all the stevedores are just drinking, it's just very, very dark and hazy, and I kind of like the colors in this one.
I didn't know if you realized it, but I'm looking at it closely, and that's one of the great things about screenshots, is it allows you to slow it down. And in the very back, underneath that bright light, is the duck.
It's a dead duck.
There's the duck. And really, it's quite a shot if you think about it, because it definitely is centering on the duck without you knowing it, because they're watching Ziggy run out at this point.
Yeah, I didn't even see that. That's really funny.
But you get that duck really highlighted in the background. It's nicely done. And you got the Polish flag, too, to the right of that. Huh. I just like almost looking at taking a shot and stopping it, and then looking at all the things in it. And what all the things might mean. Like, all the pieces matter is something we keep on coming back to with the wire. And it's interesting to do that with just a shot.
Yeah.
I'm interested in that duck. Like, because everyone was saying, don't talk about Ziggy. He's an asshole because, he let that duck drink itself to death. But just before this, everyone was cheering it on and laughing and clapping and buying the duck's rounds, Yeah. I feel like there's some kind of message in that shift.
I see it as it's an allusion to what happens later in the scene. Dead duck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, absolutely. And I think that comes up soon. Let me show you. Speaking of illusions, I think there's a lot of that going on. And I don't know if it's this next one, but maybe. Let's see. We'll go to the next one, but if not, I definitely... So, is this in the same scene earlier that we looked at, or is this later?
I think that's the same.
I was struck, if just quickly, by the dresses behind Bodhi. And again, the light. And it's like when he goes and he's saying, you got to throw out those guns, right? And there's these dresses there. And I'm just fascinated by those dressers. And there's actually, on the other side of Stringer, you can't see it too well, there's a bunch of crucifixes. And I'm wondering, like, what's going on with the dresses. I don't even have a clean reading, but again, slowing down and watching it brings out these crazy details you didn't see before. But here's the foreshadowing you were talking about, Lakeisha. You got Ziggy, and you see a lot of these chain link fences. And you actually point to a bunch of them, Lakeisha, so we can get to that again. But you got this chain link fence, and then on the other side of it, you have, right? Like, this is basically Ziggy's fate right there, right? He's going to be in prison because he makes a very stupid deal, and it goes terribly wrong. And that is really like a shot forecasting exactly what's going to happen to Ziggy in a very little time. So It's interesting.
Design-wise, you get texture in there too from the fence.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And a leather jacket.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite a shot, actually. I mean, it did catch my eye, and then you get this broader view of Ziggy, and you can see him there with the duck. So these screenshots aren't necessarily chronological.
And the cars are in the middle of them.
Yeah, it's right, and he's just looking out over the dock and over the cars, and he's literally in prison, right? Like, in some ways, and that happens a lot in this show. This isn't necessarily unique to this shot, but he is literally in prison. So those foreshadowing and illusions happen all the time. Absolutely. Okay, here's another one.
Oh, this is I think this is the scene where McNulty is like visiting his friend, and I forget what other department it is, but
he's in the FBI.
The FBI. But when they're that's perfect. So when the camera is panning out, I just thought this was beautiful, like the lights, the repetition, and just the everything's so blue. The cubicles are kind of like maze-like. And it's just so standard and consistent, which makes sense because it's the FBI office. It's very fitting.
Yeah, and this shot came up when Paul and I were talking in the first season. So this is a shot that is reproduced, actually, and I love it for all the reasons you said. And it also gets at the idea of the design of spaces in this decade, or in this century, we can call it now. Like, there are definitely spaces we kind of are familiar with, like the cubicles. Like, cubicles might not have made sense 100 years ago, but to us, they land us in a time and a place and define it. And I think that's a really interesting element of what design does and brings forth, is the notion of a kind of sense of almost like an empathy with, I think that's the wrong word though, almost an understanding, an attachment to, or recognition of. I don't know how to say it, but there's something really there. Yeah. And then, did you want to say something, Paul? Or location?
I like it just for the geometry that's going on in there.
Yeah, the boxes.
The boxes and the ceiling and on the ground, yeah.
Yeah. Here's another thing, and this, aesthetic-wise, probably not that appealing. It's a Windows computer. There was the early computers in, we saw Lester and Bunk looking at a computer. And here's Fitzhugh, who's the FBI agent, looking at George Gleekis' name and putting him in. And in this episode in particular, there's a bunch of times where the computer becomes full screen. Like, that's what they're looking at. And I'm interested how more and more the kind of aesthetic of our moment is dominated by these screens and these windows and these search buttons. And you'll see it again when they're going through the ships, right? And they'll say, oh, they got another one, and they'll have the ships, and they'll have the container come down and animate and then go. So it's a regular, and even when they're looking at the audio, when Boris is talking about cutting off hands and arms and faces, and they have his audio moving. And I'm just interested how the aesthetic of the actual computer is something that starts to dominate this series, almost like the video surveillance cameras did in season 1. You get a lot more of these computer surveillances and a lot less of the video camera surveillances in some ways, which I'm interested in terms of a switch for this season. So anyway, that's something I was thinking of. I'll also talk about this, because I like to talk. Have you noticed that? Nicole, I don't know, Nikki, have you noticed that I like to talk? I don't know. But I promise I'll shut up after this. I talked about this with Paul, and so this is something I've been digging in on with this idea of design and clothing. And you can see how people are kind of framed by the clothes they wear. And we talked about that a lot when we were watching together. And I'm interested in this particular shot because this is Russell wearing a shirt she has already worn in the season. And it's recognizable to me because I knew I had seen it in Target on sale back in 2002, 2003. And so I know it's actually a real piece of clothing that lives and breathes within the cultural context of big store shoppers like me in 2002, 2003. So I was really struck by how this show not only lands you in the kind of, clothes you might have even seen or bought or wear, which make that person that much more kind of that much more, yeah, familiar, exactly. And on top of that, she wears it more than once. Right? Like, I love that. Like, these are real people. Right? And I just love the reinforcement of that. And she's here looking at a computer screen, but I was just really struck by how much something is just having a character wear the same shirt twice.
Yeah.
Means something.
Yeah, because part of design is it's in that all the pieces matter. You know, you're making deliberate decisions to achieve a certain end, and they're saying something about her and her station. You know, both economically, you know, and in the course of the show, you know, like she shops at Target, whereas Bunk's got the three-piece suits, you know.
Yeah, and Daniels too, right? Like, and even Freeman, like, you get that brief look into Freeman's life, and he's always got those nice cardigan sweaters and those beautiful ties. He's so nicely dressed, and you see him for a second, and his house looks like it's something out of, you know, England. Like, you know, like it's sort of like these beautiful wood, you know, bookshelves and tables, and it's a quick moment, but it's really telling. Yeah, interesting.
I think it's interesting how they've been so consistent with each of the characters' styles of dress. I kind of notice it now. It's very cool. Like Bunk always has like the suspenders. Kima's always wearing like a jean jacket, hat. It's really cool.
Yeah. I really would love, like we had the audio editor in, I would really love to have the costume designer for the show. And just like what went into thinking about the costumes and how did they, in their mind, define characters through costume? Because you're right, so much of that is consistent, and as soon as it changes, like as soon as Bunk comes in season 2 in sweatpants, and he's shaking his butt, remember that one? It's like, what? That's not Bunk. That's an imposter in sweatpants. Yeah, it was interesting.
And even when I think Kima was, when she has her hair down and she's in like a very nice suit jacket or blazer, I was just like, wow, like this is a change. This is different.
Or even when she changes in season 1, when she's shot and she dresses up, right? Like, that's such a radical change. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, let's go. I love this. You guys are rocking. Let's go to the next one. All right. Ooh. I think you both had this one. So, Lakeisha, did you have this, Lakeisha, or am I wrong?
I almost picked that one, though.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I think this one is, I think I said this one, I felt like it was framed very beautifully. Like this, I think the element that I connected it to the most is symmetry. Like the trees, there are trees on both sides, the columned fence, and they're both sitting on, like, very far from each other on opposite sides of the bench with the odd lion statue right in the middle in between them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the lion symbolizes anything, but I just thought the scene was designed very beautifully.
Yeah, you got that sense of balance going on in there. Yeah.
And it seems very peaceful. Like he's, I think the San Diego detective's just sipping a coffee. They just seem like they're having a casual encounter, but behind it all, it's actually very dark.
Yeah,
and
this is actually the root of the power in all of season 2. Is in some ways, you know, the Greek on the left and his inside man in the federal government. And I love it also because I don't know if you've ever seen like JFK or All the President's Men or Parallax View. There's always these like 70s paranoia films about conspiracy. And they always seem to have a shot very similar to this, on a bench in some park with two people on either side talking to each other but not talking to each other.
Trying to look inconspicuous.
Exactly. And they're
it's
doing
so
it
obvious.
Exactly. But they're doing it in open air, and it's really almost an homage to, you know, this notion of the conspiracies we imagine in these films are real. Like, they really do have an inside man who's on the payroll, who's warning them at every turn, and turned what was a really potentially big bust in season 2 into a complete bust. You know what I mean? So I do like the shot, not only for the symmetry of it, but then there's also these other illusions to other films and other tropes in this kind of conspiracy genre that this season kind of flirts with to some degree, you know.
The other thing about that scene is you don't hear any conversation. You just hear like the traffic, and you see them, two of them sitting there,
That's right.
sort of talking, you know,
Yeah.
handing something back and forth. Yeah.
It's a great shot. Ooh, our man. So was this yours, Lakeisha? Did you?
Yeah, that was mine. I thought it was I thought this was interesting because you have the Hoover vacuum in the background, and he's like sucking up to this guy right kissing his butt so heavy. Especially because what happens afterwards. But you know, in this scene, he's like kissing his butt. He's trying to work things out with them. He's just sucking up to him.
And it's interesting because right after this shot, they like clap hands and they're like, yeah, buddy, and then like you said, you know how terribly wrong this goes. But it's an interesting shot, especially with the vacuum cleaner between them.
It almost contradicts so that you can't. It's taking the cliche away from the scene. Like you don't really know what's going to happen. You're caught off guard for the scene that comes after that because they just were like slapping hands and laughing and chatting and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a good point.
I just realized that every negotiation that or like business deal that Ziggy makes with this guy is in like their storage room, so it makes it seem like all his deals are very like not serious at all. Like this guy obviously doesn't take them seriously.
Yeah, and it seems to be Ziggy's downfall, right? Like no one takes him seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what drives him over the edge.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go. Ooh, another one.
This was interesting to me, just the use of like what is highlighted by the lighting. This is where the Greek and all his cohorts are just like having a very secretive meeting together, and it just like they're all in a circle, so it's just very enclosed. It's very exclusive, and the scene is so dark. And with the candles, the lone candles, and the empty tables, you can just tell that this is like there's no one else there. It's very serious. It's like they rented out this room for their meeting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Members only meeting.
Yeah. And it's almost like a painting, right?
Yeah.
It's like the
last meal or something.
Yeah. One of those Dutch masters where it's all dark, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's really got that sense of a cabal of people who are kind of planning and conspiring, right? And so if we think about that theme visually in the design of conspiring and the conspiracy around the Greek, who they don't even know, the cops don't even know if they're real. Shots like that really reinforce this notion of conspiracy and the design of those shots, right?
Yeah. The picture makes me take notice to what's going on around that table because all the other tables have the same candle in the center, but there's no one sitting at those tables but that table. So it directs. It's like she brings your focus. Your focus is brought to that table and what's going on there.
Yeah, it's interesting because you start at the light right in front of you in the foreground, and then it points you right back towards them. And it's interesting, like how visually, like the picture itself is training you how to watch it. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's a great shot. It's a good find. I didn't see that when I went through that, and you stopping on that really that's a nice deep. Ooh, I love Prop Joe.
That's my shot. I thought this shot was interesting because of the green hue light in the background, and they're talking about money and business. Just really interesting, the lighting that she uses in that picture. And one shot right after that, that green is really like it's on Stringer, you know, like he's the money man.
Exactly, like reflecting back on him. And they're having a really intense conversation here about one of the people back in the 60s and 70s who's kind of like an idol to Prop Joe, who didn't believe in the violence, right? It was all about the business, and it was run like a business. People weren't just shooting each other because they could. Yeah, it's interesting. Another thing I love about this shot, and I had a similar shot, but I left it out because you really nailed it with this one, which I love, is the one with Prop Joe when he's surrounded by all the kind of stuff in his workspace.
Yeah,
right?
the machines and stuff, like he's just a businessman.
Yeah, he's like fixing the toaster.
Yeah, like he's a blue-collar working man.
Exactly. And he's a tinkerer, right? So not only that, like he's got a big workshop, tinkerer.
Yeah.
And I just love how that's where he lived, right? Like that's his space. Right?
And
like
they both operate the same way. Like they have this whole facade of a real legitimate job to kind of throw you off from the side hustle that they're really doing. You know.
It's true. And it's interesting how different this is than, say, the Avon Barksdale's, which was a strip joint.
Right.
You know, this is just kind of like, corner to fix people's toasters.
Right.
And if you listen closely to this scene, you have them talking, but in the back you have a cash register regularly going. So not only does that suggest the money, but it also suggests the fact that this is actually an operating business.
Right.
He's fixing stuff. So that's cool.
Yeah, he fixes the toaster. It says, can't let a $7.50 toaster go to waste or something like that.
Absolutely. It's a shame.
Now he's thrifty.
He's totally thrifty. Like, Prop Joe is definitely thrifty.
Mm-hmm.
And he's smart. I love Prop Joe.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, maybe love's a strong word, but he's a fictional character. So. Okay. This is one I included because here's our inside man. Here's our informant, right? And you got the big federal seal behind him. And this is a shot that pans from when he's talking on the phone over to when he picks up the phone, picks out his thing, and he calls his inside man to tell him what's going on. And you'll notice it happens regularly. You get the American flag flashed by. And this flag, we saw it in the Union Hall. We see it everywhere. And again, a reminder of 9/11, a reminder of the kind of patriotism that was underway in the previous, right after that happened. And then you have people in the highest echelons of government basically not only having the flag, but then obviously who are corrupt. And it's that strange moment. You start with the WMD and Bin Laden, and then you have the people in power with that kind of almost like this trope of a flag of patriotism. And then you look how they're really acting. So there's a pretty powerful kind of design element to reinforce some of the hypocrisy.
And I like the way his face is like split between dark and light, gives him that two-faced effect.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Nice. This is kind of fun.
Yeah. There's a couple of things going on in this shot that I found interesting. The arrow, the yellow arrow that's there, it's like pointing to where the business is going on at. And it says friction on it, I think.
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
Friction materials, of course it's friction, but there's drugs in there, so. And then you got the little sign there that says no stopping,
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And then you have the
barbed wire.
Fence. Exactly.
Yeah, the barbed wire.
Yeah.
It's crazy because it's just such a high security area, but somehow they're able to sneak out these containers and make these transactions.
Almost like they're secured, like their little organization is secured.
Yeah, they're connected, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're inside, and so and then you have this one.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just something about the whole pyramid, like it makes me think of a pyramid. What do you call it?
Pyramid scam.
Yeah, pyramid scam, and it really is, because they're using, the docks to bring it in and to get it to the street. So it's a whole, industry, and like they're at the top of the pyramid,
That's right.
making it happen.
No, that's well said, and I love the actual sign. I was thinking about using the Pyramid Incorporated to do a little design assignment, like a business card or like just something to kind of play around with it, or even like there's a design assignment that has you take the basically an invoice. So what would it mean to create an invoice for Pyramid Incorporated from The Wire to actually tell the story of what's happening in episode 9, for example? But yeah, I agree with you. This is a great scene. And again, the chain link fences are everywhere in this episode. Everywhere. Okay. Ooh.
Yeah.
So I think Nikki kind of seen the same scene, but for this one, I was just shocked because you have the whole crucifixion going on, like he's crucifying them, for messing up, the mission that they were supposed to do. He's just like giving it to them, and he's like, the authority figure there, and he's standing across from the crucifix. So almost a lot going on in there, though.
That's what stood out to me the most too, was like just how dominant that cross is when in the whole scene, and also I think it's kind of funny how Stringer kind of matches, like his attire is just matching all the red in there, like he's been staying there, he belongs there.
It's his house.
He's part of the building. He's part of that room, know. And his hands in his pocket, like, he's like cool, calm, collected, But the guys in the background is like they're waiting for the principal or something.
That's right. They totally are. Even to the clothing, right? You can see the distinction. Like.
Yeah. There's a design principle of hierarchy. I think that's sort of showing in the foreground of the crucifix and the background of the three, corner boys there. And going back to the idea of like the clothing design, we've seen that a lot throughout the series where people's clothes match the environment, to show that they belong there, or to show that they don't, perhaps.
Yeah. And it's interesting, you got the organ that potentially we were hearing earlier on in this episode. And like you have the idea that this is a functioning place of, it's not a church, but in some ways between the iconography, the music, the aesthetic, it might as well be. And it's certainly a sacred place where these things are happening. And this is when, I think Stringer really takes on a whole different element of his personality. Obviously, he's in charge. But we see him preaching about WorldCom earlier in this season. And then we see him preaching here about, do I got to do everything? And he talks about the fact that he understands why CEOs get paid so much. Not only they have to have the big vision, they also have to take care of all the details because everybody's incompetent. And he's just preaching, right?
He has a narcissistic, kind of personality about himself. Doing a couple of scenes.
I think it's great. I mean, I think that's just such a beautiful shot, and it was cool to see both of you pulled that same shot because I pulled that shot too. And so it's interesting to see that, maybe over the course of these last 6 weeks, we've been starting to kind of watch this show closely enough that we can start picking up on some of these details now. So when everyone shared a few of these shots, I was like, that's really cool because, we have ways of seeing, and there are certain things that start to strike us, which is nice. I like that a lot. Okay, so feel free, Paul. I didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah, I only pulled a few shots from this, and they're on my other computer, so I don't have them here. But that shot of Prop Joe, and the shot with the praying hands, and that shot with the crucifix, they're all the same ones I took,
Exactly. So it's really cool. It's like, something's happening. So here's a new character. I don't think he's new just to this episode. Is this the first time we see him in this?
Yeah, this is the first time he shows up.
Yeah, so Brother
I think the way they took this shot made him just central, the way she posed him in the middle of the screen to elude that he's going to be the central figure in the next episode coming forth, and this is the guy to watch, and he's watching the towers like, I'm going to get this in shape, I'm going to clean this up, weed out the roots. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree.
And sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nikki, please.
I was going to say his, going back to the costume design, like you can really tell that he's not from this area, like he doesn't belong, he's an outsider because no one we've seen has a bow tie and is so polished, has those kinds of glasses.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I also, like you said, the costume effect here is amazing because you have the 1950s, 60s glasses, or 60s in particular. You have the bow tie, and you have the Nation of Islam, obviously. It's suggesting the nation, right? There's someone who even in this episode who talks about the nation in relationship to him. And so there's this whole other kind of context that's brought in with just this simple costume, right? Like, Brother Mazone comes in with this costume, and immediately it introduces a whole nother kind of historical element to what's happening in Baltimore and the connection to New York and the question of the Nation of Islam. And we don't really find out, at least in this episode, what Brother Mazone's deal is. But it just, infers so much information about a character just by the glasses and the bow tie. It's amazing.
I thought he was coming to serve bean pies in the last car or something. Like, what is he gonna do? He doesn't even look. He doesn't look like he would harm a fly.
Yeah.
It's harmless.
Yeah, and it's funny how he becomes, anything but that. And everybody in Baltimore is petrified, right? Like, even Prompt Joe earlier is like, Brother Mazone. Like, they're like, we're not touching that. Like, that's your problem, Stringer. That's not my problem.
Yeah.
Like, what does he say?
Like, bodies on in the
he got all those bodies on him.
Yeah.
I was like, how is he? What is he gonna bring, a bomb or something?
Yeah, he's got more bodies on him than the Chinese cemetery, is what he said.
Yeah.
And I love how Prop Joe is like celebrating the fact that he's from the East Side. Like, it's a good day to be on the East Side because you guys are all done if you're going to be dealing with Mozone. So,
Right.
So what is I think, let me just make sure before I say, but I believe, yeah, that's it. Those are the screenshots we had to share. What do you guys think in terms of, I was actually pretty excited that we were kind of a piece in terms of thinking through some of this stuff. But any last thoughts or commentary upon design in episode 9?
Well, I didn't think that I would see any real design, but then when I went back and looked at it, I was like, there's all kinds of stuff going on here.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Whenever we have to pay attention to something, it just jumps out at us.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I felt that way about sound a couple weeks ago, and even about this, watching this again. It's interesting that we all had similar screenshots that we found interesting because it means like they framed it that way for it to stand out to people, and it stood out to like all of us. So.
And I think that's I agree entirely, and I think that's one of the things that design hopefully invokes is like this isn't just a series of haphazard shots strung together to try and tell a haphazard story. Like there's a design and a narrative arc, but also a visual and audio and even costume design and set design arc to every bit of this episode. And I think what I'm really enjoying about watching The Wire with everybody is that we can stop for a moment and look at that and wonder about it and say, well, what would that mean for the stuff we create,
I think Allison brought it up in her talking about the Vanelli Canyon, that it's all in the details, and that's something that you pick up on throughout this episode. There's nothing, well, not nothing, but there's very few shots that you see design as an overt element, but if you look closely at the details, there is planning and a deliberate decision and putting that there for a purpose.
And to me, it's like in all of the parts contribute to telling the story. Like if the sound wasn't there, it wouldn't be as effective. If the shot composition area wouldn't be as effective as it is. I don't know. Just my eyes are being trained to look for those things, so now it makes it more realistic.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot to be said about that last point, is the realism that comes with recognizing the designer, recognizing the shirt, recognizing the tidbits that are on Prop Joe's kind of, desk or whatever, right? Like there's a scene, it's a terrible scene when the kid was shot in the head at the opening. You'll have him and there's a pool of blood, but then there's also a little rubber ducky right next to his head. Right. And it's really, it's a believable moment where he would have something like that around his wound. And those details, I bet people have labored many hours thinking about how to make such what seems like a seamless, realistic show seem that way. So it's the irony of the artifice of reality, right? And design is that.
And then it almost is, it's so realistic. Some of those, attributes are so realistic that we don't pay attention to them. Yeah. We're watching the story because everything that's going on, it works together. So it's so real that you don't really pay attention to it until you're putting our focus on those things. So we're noticing them, but a regular watcher wouldn't notice it because it all makes sense. Right. Like if the kid was in a room, I don't know, that didn't look like a kid's room, we would notice that. But because the ducky was there, we really didn't pay too much attention to it because it just went together, like peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good way of reading, like just ways of reading, right? Like, like you can read a TV show just like you could read a good TV show, I imagine, just like you could read a great work of art or literature.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. That was a great discussion, guys.
All right.
You rule the school. Now, before we leave, unfortunately, we have to get this right because every group has failed us up until now. And it kind of can't do it like wire106 radio because we're not on the radio. So we have to say something like wire106 for life. But we have to say it together in some sort of harmony and unity. It's very hard. And we have to figure this out.
Why don't we set it up in fours? You say wire, she says 106, for life.
I love it. So, okay, I'll say wire.
Okay.
What are you going to say, Nikki?
106.
Good. What are you going to say, Paul?
4.
What are you going to say?
Life.
Keisha? Okay, we ready? 3. 1, 2, 3. Wire.
106.
4.
Life.
Nice. Teamwork. All right, guys, you rule.
All right.
All right.
Great night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.